They called me a disgrace to the Sterling name because I restored antiques instead of banking. On Grandma's 80th birthday, my parents forced her to rewrite her will at the dinner table, cutting me out for their golden son. She signed with a secret smile. They didn't know that signature was a death sentence for their greed. Instead of an empire, they inherited exactly $1. Here is how I, the family failure, destroyed their fake legacy. My name is Kara Windermere, and I am 32 years old, to the rest of the world, or at least the very small slice of it that cares about old paper and fading ink. I am a skilled restorationist at the Archive Haven. It is a quiet, dusty little shop in the city where time moves slower than the traffic outside. I spend my days with tweezers and wheat paste, breathing life back into things that others have forgotten. I love the smell of decaying lignin and leather. I love the patience it takes to mend a tear in a page from the 1800s. But to the people currently clinking crystal glasses in the room beyond these double doors, I am something else entirely. I am a bad investment. I am a sunk cost. The drive out to the Hamptons always felt like a slow constriction of my airways. The closer I got to the ocean, the harder it became to breathe. The Sterling estate, a sprawling mansion that looked more like a museum than a home, loomed against the gray Atlantic sky. It was my grandmother's house, technically, but my parents, Richard and Elena Sterling, had been ruling it like regents waiting for the Queen to abdicate for as long as I could remember. Today was Beatrice Sterling's 85th birthday. It was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, as I parked my 10-year-old sedan behind the line of gleaming black luxury SUVs, I knew it was going to be an ambush. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and I wore a simple navy dress that I knew my mother would hate. She hated anything that did not scream money. I took a deep breath, grabbed the small brown package from the passenger seat, and stepped out into the salt air. The party was in full swing by the time I walked through the massive front entrance. The foyer was filled with people who smelled like expensive cologne and old money. My parents were standing near the grand staircase, holding court. My father, Richard, looked impeccable in his bespoke suit, his silver hair coiffed to perfection. My mother, Elena, was a vision in silk, her smile tight and practiced as she greeted a senator's wife. They did not see me at first, or rather, they chose not to see me. I stood on the periphery, a ghost in my own family home, watching them fawn over my brother. Preston was there. Of course. Preston, the golden boy. Preston, the 35-year-old director of the Sterling hedge fund. He was laughing at something a business associate said, his head thrown back, teeth white and perfect. He looked like he owned the place, and if my parents had their way, he soon would, finally. My mother's gaze flickered in my direction. Her smile didn't drop, but her eyes went cold. She excused herself and glided over to me, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. "Kara," she said. It was not a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of a nuisance. "You are late? Traffic was bad," I said, clutching the package tighter. "Happy birthday to Grandma. Where is she?" "She is in the drawing room, holding court," Mother said, looking me up and down with open disdain. "Is that what you are wearing? You look like a librarian who got lost." "I am a restorationist." "Mom, same thing." She waved a hand dismissively. "Try to stay out of the photos. Darling, we want this event to look professional. Preston has potential investors here tonight." I walked past her, my stomach churning. It was always about Preston. It was always about the image. I found Grandma Beatrice in the drawing room, seated in her wheelchair by the fireplace. She looked frail, much frailer than the last time I had seen her. Her skin was like parchment, translucent and delicate, but her eyes, those sharp, steel-gray eyes that I had inherited, were alert. She was surrounded by distant relatives who were loudly complimenting her shawl, but she looked bored. When she saw me, her expression softened. "Kara," she rasped, reaching out a trembling hand. "Hi, Grandma," I said, taking her hand. It felt like a bird's wing, light and fragile. Happy birthday. I knelt beside her chair, ignoring the dirty looks from my aunts who had been interrupted. I brought you something. I placed the brown package in her lap. My hands were shaking slightly. I had spent 6 months on this. It was grandfather's war diary. I had found it rotting in the attic years ago. The binding was destroyed, the pages covered in mildew. I had spent hundreds of hours washing the pages, resizing the paper, and rebinding it in period-accurate leather. I had gold-tooled the spine myself. Grandma began to unwrap it, her fingers struggling with the paper. "Oh, let me help you with that, Mother." My father's voice boomed. He had appeared behind us, looming large. He snatched the package from her hands and tore the paper off. He held up the book. A frown creased his forehead. "What is this?" he asked, turning it over. "It looks old. It is Grandpa's diary," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "From 1944. I restored it. I thought Grandma would like to read his handwriting again." Father wrinkled his nose, as if the book smelled of rot. He did not open it. He did not look at the exquisite gold leafwork I had agonized over. He just tossed it onto the side table, where it landed with a dull thud next to empty cocktail napkins. "Quaint," he said, wiping his hand on his jacket as if the book had been dirty. "But perhaps we should focus on gifts that actually matter." Before I could object, before I could pick up the labor of love he had just discarded like trash. Preston stepped forward. He clapped his hands, demanding the room's attention. "Everyone, please," Preston shouted, flashing his charming grin. "If we could move to the window, I have a little surprise for the birthday girl." The crowd dutifully shuffled to the French doors that opened out onto the driveway. I stayed by Grandma, my hand resting on her shoulder. "Look out there." Grandma Preston pointed. Parked on the gravel drive, wrapped in a gigantic red bow, was a brand-new, silver luxury sedan. It was sleek, low to the ground, and probably cost more than I would make in 5 years. "For you," Grandma Preston announced, the ultimate ride for the matriarch of the family. The room erupted in applause. People oohed and awed. Preston beamed, soaking in the adoration. My mother leaned down to Grandma. "Isn't your grandson wonderful?" "Beatrice, look at that machine." Grandma stared out the window. Then she looked up at Preston. "I cannot drive." "Preston," she said dryly, "my license was revoked 4 years ago. You know this." Preston laughed, a booming, confident sound that dismissed her concern entirely. "Oh, don't worry about that. I will drive you, or we will hire a driver. The point is, you deserve the best engineering German money can buy. It is a symbol, Grandma, a symbol of sterling power." He wasn't giving it to her. He was buying himself a new toy and writing it off as a gift. I knew it. Grandma knew it. But the guests just clapped louder. Dinner was an exercise in torture. We sat at a long mahogany table, set with enough silverware to perform a surgery. I was seated at the far end, naturally, while Preston sat at Grandma's right hand. The conversation, steered aggressively by my father, was entirely about money. Market trends, real estate acquisitions, and the brilliance of Preston's latest fund strategy. "So, Kara," Uncle Marcus called out from across the table, a piece of steak dangling from his fork. Still playing with old glue and paper, I politely cut my food. "It is historical preservation." "Uncle Marcus, it is important work. Important." My mother laughed. A sharp, brittle sound. "It is a hobby. Kara, an expensive hobby that pays you. What minimum wage I make enough to support myself." I lied. I was barely scraping by, living in a studio apartment the size of a closet. But I would never give them the satisfaction of knowing that. Preston swirled his wine, looking at me with pity. "You know, sis, I have an opening for an executive assistant. You could quit the glue factory. I would pay you triple what you make now. You just have to answer phones and get my coffee." The table chuckled. "I am happy where I am." "Preston," I said, gripping my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. My father slammed his hand down on the table. The silver jumped. "Happy you are embarrassing us." "Kara, Do you know what it is like when people ask what my daughter does? And I have to say, she fixes old books. It is pathetic. You are 32 years old. You are a bad investment, a failure. We gave you the same education as Preston, the same opportunities, and look at him, and look at you. I looked at Preston. He was smirking, secure in his victory. Then I looked at the head of the table. Grandma Beatrice was not eating. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was watching me, not with pity, but with a strange, intense curiosity. I lowered my eyes. I will not quit my job. Father, then stop expecting us to subsidize your mediocre life when we are gone, he snapped. The meal ended in a stifling silence that only the clinking of dessert spoons dared to break. I stood up to help clear the plates, a habit I had never shaken, desperate for something to do with my hands. Leave it for the staff. Kara, Mother hissed, you are not a maid, though you certainly dress like one. As the guests began to filter out to the patio for cigars and brandy, the atmosphere in the dining room shifted. The air grew heavy, charged with a specific kind of predatory intent. The casual cruelty of dinner was over. Now came the business. My father nodded to Preston. Preston reached under his chair and pulled out a leather portfolio. Mother moved to the doors, closing them softly. Shutting out the rest of the party, it was just us now, the inner circle, and me, the outsider trapped within. Father and Preston walked over to Grandma Beatrice. She looked small in her wheelchair, a tiny figure against the massive fireplace. Mother, Father began, his voice taking on a tone of forced gentleness that made my skin crawl. We need to discuss the future. Grandma looked up. I thought we were celebrating my survival of the past. Richard. We are, Preston said, kneeling beside her. But we need to protect the legacy. We have been talking, with the market being so volatile, and with certain family members lacking the financial acumen to manage wealth. He cast a pointed look at me. I stood frozen near the sideboard, clutching a dirty napkin. We think it is best to simplify the estate, Father said. He took the papers from Preston and spread them out on the table in front of Grandma. What is this? Grandma asked, putting on her spectacles. It is an updated will. Mother, Elena said, stepping forward, it consolidates the assets, the properties, the stocks, the offshore accounts. Everything goes into the trust managed by Richard and Preston. And Kara, Grandma asked. Her voice was quiet. Father sighed, as if explaining something to a child. Mother, look at her. She fixes books. If we leave her a share of the estate, she will just squander it. Or worse, some con artist will marry her and take it. We are doing this for her own good. We will provide her a monthly stipend, enough to keep her fed. But the control needs to stay with the men who know how to grow the money. I felt the blood drain from my face. They were cutting me out, completely. A stipend meant I would be on an allowance, forever under their thumb, forever begging my brother for permission to buy a loaf of bread. Grandma, I started, taking a step forward. You do not have to quiet. Kara, Father barked, spinning on me. This does not concern you. It concerns me entirely, I said, my voice shaking. It concerns the sterling legacy, Preston shouted. Standing up, you have contributed nothing to this family. Kara, nothing. You are a leech. We are just making it official. He turned back to Grandma, thrusting a gold pen into her hand. Sign it. Grandma, it is the only logical choice. Protect the family. Cut the failure loose. The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. I looked at my grandmother. She sat motionless, looking at the document that would turn me into a pauper. Then, she slowly lifted her head and looked at me. Her eyes were clear, sharp. There was no confusion in them, no senility. She looked at my hands, stained with ink from my work. She looked at my face, fighting back tears of humiliation. She looked at the parents and brother who treated her birthday like a board meeting and her granddaughter like a servant. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell her I didn't care about the money. I just wanted her to not let them bully her. But Grandma made a tiny, almost imperceptible motion with her hand, a slight dip of her chin. Silence. She wanted me to stay quiet. I clamped my mouth shut. Grandma Beatrice turned back to her son and grandson. They were looming over her, their faces flushed with greed and anticipation. "You think Kara is a failure?" Grandma asked softly. "She has no ambition." "Mother," Father said, "she is weak." Grandma hummed, a low sound in her throat. She looked down at the paper. "If I sign this," she said, "you will stop bothering me about the estate. You will let me live my remaining days in peace." "Yes, Grandma," Preston said, practically salivating. "We will handle everything. You won't have to worry about a thing, and you are sure this is what you want, to change the will I wrote 10 years ago." "Absolutely." "Mother," Elena said, "it is for the best." Grandma paused. A strange expression crossed her face. It was not defeat. It looked, for a fleeting second, like amusement, like she had just heard a joke that only she understood. "Very well," she said. She uncapped the pen. "If you want the will changed, I will change it right now." My heart shattered. She was giving in, after everything. She was giving in to them. Grandma looked toward the corner of the room where the shadows were deepest. "Mr. Vance," a man stepped out from the alcove. I hadn't even noticed him standing there. It was Arthur Vance, her personal attorney for 40 years. He was a small man with glasses and a face made of stone. "Yes, Mrs. Sterling," he said. "My family wants a new will," Grandma said, her voice strengthening. "Take me to the study. We have work to do." Preston let out a breath of relief that sounded like a tire deflating. "Thank you. Grandma, you are making the right decision." Father clapped Mr. Vance on the shoulder. "Make sure the language is watertight. Arthur, we want no loopholes." Grandma did not look at them. She did not look at me. She simply engaged the motor on her wheelchair and buzzed toward the study door, Mr. Vance following close behind with his briefcase. As the heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, my father let out a loud, triumphant laugh. He walked over to the sideboard and poured 3 glasses of scotch. One for him, one for Preston, one for my mother. He did not pour one for me. "To the Sterling Empire." He toasted, raising his glass high. "To the future." Preston agreed, clinking his glass against Father's. I stood there, watching them celebrate my erasure. They were so happy. They were so sure they had just won the lottery. They had no idea what had just happened behind those eyes of gray steel. And standing there in the cold light of the chandelier, listening to their laughter, neither did I. All I knew was that I had lost, or so I thought. The decline happened faster than anyone expected. Or perhaps it only seemed fast because I was the only one watching it happen. In the months following the birthday party, the grand Sterling estate transformed from a palace of arrogance into a mausoleum of silence. The staff moved through the hallways like shadows, sensing the shift in the air, while the master and mistress of the house busied themselves with galas and board meetings, treating their dying mother like an inconvenience that had overstayed its welcome. I moved into the guest room down the hall from Grandma Beatrice. I did not ask for permission. I simply packed a bag, left my tiny apartment in the city, and drove back to the Hamptons. My mother, Elena, raised an eyebrow when she saw my suitcase in the foyer, but she did not stop me. In fact, I think she was relieved. Having me there meant she did not have to pretend to care. It meant she could outsource the grim reality of death to the daughter she already considered a servant. The days bled into nights, marked only by the rhythm of the oxygen concentrator and the schedule of medications. I spent hours sitting by her bedside, reading aloud from the very books I had restored, or simply holding her hand as she drifted in and out of consciousness. The woman who had once commanded rooms with a single glance was now fading, her skin becoming as thin and delicate as the antique onion skin paper I handled at work. My parents and Preston did visit, if you could call it that. Their visits were performative, brief, and surgically precise. My mother would sweep into the room in a cloud of expensive perfume that made Grandma cough. She would sit on the edge of the bed for exactly 5 minutes, holding Grandma's hand just long enough for Preston to snap a photo on his phone. You look peaceful, Mother, she would say, checking her reflection in the mirror above the dresser. We are keeping everything running smoothly for you. Do not worry about a thing. Then she would post the photo to her social media with a caption about the heartbreak of the long goodbye and the strength of family bonds. I would watch the likes roll in by the hundreds while she sanitized her hands and left to attend a luncheon. Preston was worse. He did not even pretend to care about her comfort. He would pace around the room, talking loudly on his phone about margins and liquidity, ignoring my hissed requests for quiet. When he did speak to Grandma, his voice was tight with a suppressed panic that I did not understand at the time. "Grandma," he would say, leaning over her, his eyes darting around the room. "The account's in the Caymans. The access codes are in the blue ledger. Right? You haven't moved them." Grandma would pretend to be asleep. I saw the slight flutter of her eyelids, the tightening of her jaw. She knew exactly what he was doing. He was not grieving. He was auditing. One rainy Tuesday in November. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The storm battered the windows, rattling the panes in their frames. But inside, the air grew heavy and still. The nurse had left for the night, leaving us alone in the dim light of the bedside lamp. Grandma stirred. Her eyes opened, and for the first time in weeks, the milky haze of medication was gone. They were sharp, lucid, and intensely focused on me. "Kara," she whispered. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping together. "I am here, Grandma," I said, leaning forward and taking her cold hand. "Do you need water?" "No," she said firmly. "Listen to me. There is not much time left." I squeezed her hand. "Do not say that. You are strong. I am tired, Kara, and I am ready. But before I go, you need to understand something." She pulled her hand from mine and reached under her pillow. Her movements were slow, trembling with effort. When she pulled her hand back, she was holding something small and metallic. She pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers over it. I opened my hand. It was a key. It was not a sleek, modern security key, nor was it the ornate brass key to the front door. It was old, iron, and covered in rust. It looked like something that belonged to a shed that had collapsed 50 years ago. "Keep this," she said, her gaze locking onto mine. "Do not lose it, and do not tell them. Tell who I asked." Confused. "Mom and Dad." "Anyone," she hissed, a sudden burst of energy seizing her. "Especially not them. They see with their greed. Kara, they look at the surface and see only what shines. They do not understand that the real value is always buried deep." I looked at the rusty object. It felt heavy, cold, and insignificant. "What does it open?" I asked. She smiled, and it was that same mysterious, knowing smile she had worn at the birthday dinner when she signed the new will. "It opens the truth," she murmured. "Remember what I told you. Do not look at the surface. Look at the core. What they throw away is the treasure. What they despise is the gold." "But Grandma." "Promise me," she interrupted, her grip on my wrist surprisingly strong. "Promise me you will not let them break you. When the storm comes, and it will come, you stand tall. You are a Windermere. You are a Sterling. But most of all, you are you. I promise," I whispered, tears spilling over my cheeks. She exhaled, a long rattling sound, and her head sank back into the pillows. "Good. Now, hide it. He is coming." I barely had time to slip the key into the pocket of my cardigan before the door flew open. Preston strode in, bringing with him the smell of rain and stale cigarette smoke. He looked haggard. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his tie was loosened, hanging askew around his neck. He didn't even look at me. He went straight to the bedside table and started rifling through the drawer. "Preston," I hissed, standing up. "What are you doing?" "Where is the safety deposit box key?" he muttered, tossing pill bottles aside. "She kept a spare here." "I know she did. She is dying." "Preston," I said, my voice rising, "get out of that drawer." He spun around, his face twisted in a snarl. "Shut up. Kara, you don't know anything. I need to verify some assets for the estate tax filing." It is for her own good." He looked at Grandma, who was watching him with half-lidded eyes. "Grandma," he said, his voice dropping to a desperate plead, "the box at First National, the one with the bonds. Where is the key? I need to move them before the freeze." Grandma looked at him. She did not speak. She simply closed her eyes and turned her head away. Facing the wall, Preston let out a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. He kicked the leg of the armchair, glaring at her back. "Fine," he spat. "Be stubborn. It doesn't matter. In a week, it will all be mine anyway." He stormed out, leaving the door wide open. I rushed to the door and closed it, shaking. When I turned back to the bed, the rhythm of the room had changed. The silence was absolute. The oxygen machine was still humming, but the breathing underneath it had stopped. I walked slowly to the bed. Her chest was still. Her face was smoothed of all pain and worry. She was gone. I did not call my parents immediately. I did not call the nurse for 1 hour. I sat with her in the quiet dark. I held her hand until the warmth began to fade. I cried for the woman who had been the only shield I had ever known, and I touched the rusty key in my pocket, feeling its rough edges against my thumb, wondering what kind of burden she had just passed to me. The funeral was a spectacle, just as the birthday party had been. It was held at the largest cathedral in the city, a place Grandma had visited maybe twice in her life. My mother had arranged for massive floral displays that cost more than my annual salary. White lilies, thousands of them, choking the air with their cloying scent. I stood in the front row, wearing black, feeling like an imposter in my own family. My parents stood to my right, accepting condolences with practiced grace. "She is at peace now," my father said gravely to the CEO of a rival firm. "She had a long, full life, and she left the legacy in good hands." "We are devastated," my mother added, dabbing at a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. "But we must be strong, for the family." I looked around the packed church. There were hundreds of people here, business partners, politicians, socialites, but I recognized almost no one who had actually known Beatrice Sterling, the person. Her gardening friends were not here. The staff from the local library she supported were stuck in the back pews behind the velvet ropes. This was not a funeral. It was a networking event, at the reception afterwards, held back at the estate. The exclusion was palpable. Relatives I hadn't seen in years breezed past me without a word, gravitating toward Preston and my father like iron filings to a magnet. They knew where the power lay. They knew who controlled the purse strings. I retreated to the corner of the ballroom, clutching a glass of warm water. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Aunt Marlene, my father's sister. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and discomfort. "Kara," she said, "you look tired." "I am fine, Aunt Marlene." She glanced over at my father, who was laughing loudly at a joke. "Look, honey, I know this is hard, but try not to cause a scene when the will is read." "Okay." "We all know how Beatrice was at the end. If she forgot you, it wasn't personal. She was just confused." "She was not confused," I said sharply. Marlene patted my arm condescendingly. "Of course, dear, whatever helps you sleep." She drifted away as Preston approached. He was holding a scotch, his face flushed. He looked better than he had on the night she died, buoyed by the adrenaline of his imminent inheritance. "Enjoying the free booze, little sister?" he asked, leaning in close. His breath smelled of alcohol and mints. "I am drinking water." "Preston." "Right. Well, listen, I wanted to give you a heads up because I am a generous brother." He took a sip of his drink, smirking over the rim of the glass. "Once the will is probated, Dad and I are going to be making some changes to the real estate portfolio. We are liquidating the smaller assets." So I asked, my stomach tightening, "So, that little apartment you are renting in the city, the one in the building Dad owns?" I stared at him. I had lived there for 5 years. I paid rent every month. Even though it was to my parents' holding company, "I need it back," he said casually. "By the end of the month, Preston, that is my home. It is a storage unit with a window." He laughed. "And I actually need it for storage. I have some archives from the firm I need to stash somewhere secure. You can find another place, right? With your salary. He looked at my simple black dress, his eyes mocking. You cannot kick me out in 2 weeks, I said, my voice trembling. I can do whatever I want. Kara, it is my building now, or it will be. Next week. Consider this your eviction notice. He patted my cheek, a gesture so patronizing it took every ounce of my self-control not to slap him. Don't worry. You can always come stay in the servants' quarters here if you get desperate. We might need someone to polish the silver. He winked and walked away. Disappearing into the crowd of sycophants, I stood there, alone in the middle of 300 people, feeling the walls closing in. They were taking everything, my grandmother, my home, my dignity. They wanted to scrub me from the face of the earth, to erase the one stain on their perfect sterling reputation. I reached into my pocket and closed my hand around the rusty key. The metal bit into my palm, grounding me. Look at the core, she had said. What they throw away is the treasure. I took a deep breath. Let them laugh. Let them plot. They thought the game was over, but they did not know that the first piece had not even been moved yet. The following Tuesday. The summons arrived. It was a heavy cream-colored envelope from the law offices of Vance Associates, the reading of the last will and testament of Beatrice Sterling. I arrived at the law firm 15 minutes early. The office was in a glass skyscraper downtown, miles away from the dusty quiet of my restoration shop. The receptionist directed me to the main conference room. When I entered, my family was already there. They had taken the seats at the head of the long granite table. My father sat at the very top, looking like a king waiting for his coronation. My mother was to his right, and Preston to his left. They were dressed in business attire, their faces masks of solemn anticipation that barely concealed their greed. There was a single empty chair at the far end of the table. Near the door, the message was clear I was barely a participant. Sit down, Kara, my father said without looking up from his phone. We are just waiting for Vance. I sat. The distance between us felt like an ocean. So, Preston said, drumming his fingers on the table, I was running the numbers last night. Conservatively, with the property appreciation in the Hamptons and the portfolio growth, we are looking at 50 million, maybe 55. Excellent. Father nodded. We can finally move forward with the acquisition of the marina. And the yacht? Mother added. We will need something appropriate for the summer season. They were carving up the carcass before it was even cold. They discussed millions of dollars like they were deciding what to order for lunch. Not once did they mention Grandma. Not once did they mention her charities, her love for history, her kindness. It was just assets, liquidity, leverage. The door opened and Mr. Vance entered. He was carrying a thick leather folder. He looked tired, his face grayer than I remembered, but his expression was unreadable. He nodded to my parents, then looked down the long table and met my eyes. For a second, his mask slipped, and I saw a flash of something warm. Solidarity. Pity I couldn't tell. Good morning, he said, setting the folder down on the table with a heavy thud. Let's get on with it. Arthur, my father said, checking his watch. We have a lunch reservation at 1. Mister? Vance sat down. He adjusted his glasses. He opened the folder. I put my hand in my pocket and gripped the key. The metal was warm now, absorbed with my body heat. I did not know what it opened. I did not know if it would save me or sink me. But as I looked at the smug faces of the people who shared my blood but not my heart, I knew one thing. Whatever was in that folder, it was not what they expected, and whatever this key opened, it was the only thing I had left. Shall we begin, mister? Vance asked. The room went silent. The air crackled with the electricity of $50 million waiting to change hands. I held my breath, squeezed the rusty iron, and waited for the world to fall apart. The mahogany table in the conference room was so polished, I could see the reflection of my own nervous hands clasped on top of it. It was cold in the room, a sterile, corporate chill that seemed to radiate from the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. My parents, Richard and Elena, sat at the head of the table like monarchs on their thrones, their postures rigid with entitlement. Preston sat beside them, tapping away on his smartphone, likely checking the price of the yacht he intended to buy by lunch. I sat at the far end, exiled to the corner nearest the door, the place reserved for junior associates and unwanted guests. The distance between us was only 10 feet of wood, but it felt like a canyon. Arthur Vance sat opposite my father. He took a long time arranging his papers. He adjusted his glasses. He took a sip of water. He was stalling, and the tension in the room began to ratchet up with every second of silence. "Arthur, please," my father said, his voice tight with impatience. "We all know what is in the document. Mother signed the amendment at the party. Let us just get the signatures over with so we can release the funds. Mr. Vance looked up. His eyes were unreadable behind his thick lenses. He cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Beatrice Alexandra Sterling, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils." Preston smirked at me. It was a small, cruel twitch of his lips that said, "Game over, little sister." "Mr. Vance continued, his voice steady and monotone, "I have spent the last 85 years building a legacy. I have watched my family grow, and I have observed the character of those who bear my name. I have seen greed disguised as ambition. I have seen cruelty disguised as strength, and I have seen silence disguised as weakness." My mother shifted in her seat. "That is a very poetic opening. Arthur, did she write that herself?" "She did, Mrs. Sterling," Vance replied curtly. He went back to the paper. "To begin, I acknowledge the vast estate I leave behind, the property in the Hamptons, valued at $18 million, the investment portfolio, valued at $22 million, the various liquid assets and offshore holdings, totaling another $10 million. My father let out a long exhale, his eyes closing briefly as if savoring the numbers. $50 million. It was real. It was happening. "Mr. Vance paused. He turned the page. The sound of the crisp paper turning was like a gunshot in the quiet room. However, he read, his voice dropping an octave. "A legacy is not just about what you leave behind in the bank. It is about what you leave behind in the world. And it is about ensuring that resources are placed in hands that understand their true value." Preston stopped tapping on his phone. He looked up, a frown creasing his forehead. "First, to my only son, Richard, and his wife, Elena," my parents straightened up, leaning forward in unison. "You have spent your lives worrying about the Sterling fortune. You have constantly expressed your fear that my assets would be divided among those you deemed unworthy. You demanded that I cut the failure out of my will to protect the family wealth. I have taken your advice to heart." My father nodded, shooting a vindictive look at me. "Exactly. Smart woman. Therefore," Vance read on, "I have decided to leave you exactly what you deserve based on the love and care you showed me in my final years. I leave you the entire contents of my wallet at the time of my passing." The room went dead silent. "I beg your pardon," my mother whispered. "Mr. Vance reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a small, white envelope. He slid it across the mahogany table. It spun slowly and came to a stop in front of my father. My father stared at it. He did not move to touch it. "Open it, Mr. Vance said. My father's hand trembled as he picked up the envelope. He ripped it open. He turned it upside down and shook it. A single, crumpled dollar bill fluttered out and landed on the table. It was followed by 2 quarters, a dime, and 3 pennies, $1.63. "Mr. Vance clarified. "She wanted to make sure you received every penny. Is this a joke?" my father roared. He stood up so abruptly his heavy leather chair slammed into the wall behind him. "This is a sick joke. Arthur, where is the rest of it, Mr. Vance did not flinch. "Please sit down. Mr. Sterling, I am not finished." Preston was staring at the dollar bill, his face pale. "What about me?" he demanded. "She promised me. At the party. She said she was changing it for us, Mr. Vance looked at Preston. Ah, yes. To my grandson, Preston. Preston leaned over the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge. You have always admired the finer things, Vance read. You take great pride in appearances. You specifically asked for the vintage car collection, the Rolls-Royce, the Aston Martin, the vehicles that symbolize sterling power. Yes, Preston breathed. Yes, those are worth $5 million alone. I hereby bequeath to you the lifetime right to visit these automobiles. Vance continued without missing a beat. Visit Preston asked, his voice cracking. As of last week, the entire collection has been donated to the City Museum of Transportation under the Beatrice Sterling Trust. I have arranged for you to receive a lifetime membership card, granting you free admission during regular business hours so you may gaze upon them whenever you wish. No, Preston screamed. He slammed his fist onto the table. That is illegal. She was senile. She did not know what she was doing. You tricked her, I assure you. Mister, Vance said, his voice turning ice cold. Your grandmother was of perfectly sound mind. In fact, I have a video recording of her signing this document, in which she specifically cites your behavior at her birthday dinner as the primary motivation for these bequests. Would you like me to play it for the court? My mother let out a high-pitched sob. She sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. $1, she wailed. She left us $1. My father was purple with rage. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You, he bellowed. You did this. You poisoned her against us. You spent all those months whispering in her ear while we were working to protect this family. I sat frozen in my chair. I was as shocked as they were. I had expected to be cut out. I had expected nothing. I did not expect this scorched earth retribution. Mr. Vance turned his gaze to me. The room fell into a hostile, heavy silence. My father was breathing hard, his eyes bulging. Preston looked like he was about to vomit. And finally, Vance read, his voice softening just a fraction. To my granddaughter, Kara. My father let out a harsh, barking laugh. Oh, here it comes. Here is the payout. The little nurse gets the gold. Right. That was the plan. Mr. Vance ignored him. Kara, you are the only one who understands that value is not found on the surface. You are the only one who knows how to mend what is broken. You are the only one who has never asked me for a thing. I felt tears prick my eyes. Therefore, I leave you the property known as the Hollow, located in upstate New York, along with all contents contained within the structure and on the grounds. There was a pause. My father blinked. Then, slowly, a look of confusion replaced the rage on his face. The Hollow, he repeated. Then he started to laugh. It was not a happy laugh. It was a mean, jagged sound. The Hollow. You mean that rotting shack in the middle of nowhere? The one Dad bought for a hunting trip 50 years ago and never went back to Preston, looked up. His eyes narrowing. Wait. The dump off Route 9. That place has been condemned for decades. It is literally a pile of garbage. My mother lowered her hands from her face. She looked at me, and her expression shifted from despair to vicious glee. She left you the junk pile, she asked, her voice trembling with hysteria. She left us $1, but she left you a pile of rotting wood and raccoon droppings. Mr. Vance slid a thick document toward me. This is the deed to the property. It includes the house, the barn, and the 20 acres of scrubland surrounding it. I reached out and took the document. My hands were steady now. My father fell back into his chair, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. Oh, this is rich. This is perfect. Beatrice really was crazy in the end. She hated us all. He looked at me with a sneer that twisted his handsome features into something ugly. Congratulations. Kara, you are finally a property owner. You are the queen of the junk pile. It fits you perfectly. You love old, broken things. Well, now you have the biggest broken thing in the state. Preston let out a breathy chuckle, shaking his head. I checked the assessment on that land years ago. It is worthless. The cost to demolish the structure is more than the land value. She basically left you a debt. Good luck paying the property taxes on your salary. He reached out and flicked the crumpled dollar bill across the table, It slid over the polished wood and stopped right in front of my deed. "Here," he said. "Take it. You are going to need it more than us. Consider it a donation to your renovation fund." My mother stood up, smoothing her silk skirt. She looked at me with pure venom. "You deserve this, Kara. You thought you were so special, sitting by her bed, playing the martyr, and she played you for a fool just like she played us." I looked at the dollar bill, then I looked at the deed, the hollow. I remembered Grandma mentioning it once, years ago. She had called it her sanctuary, but my father had forbidden her from going there, saying it was unsafe. I looked up at Mr. Vance. He was watching me closely. He did not look like a man who had just read a joke. He looked like a man who was waiting for me to understand something. I picked up the pen. "I will sign," I said quietly. "You are actually accepting it," Preston laughed. "You are an idiot. You should refuse the inheritance. It is a liability. I am signing." I repeated. I signed my name on the dotted line. Kara Windermere. My father stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked diminished, angry, but mostly he looked eager to leave this room where he had been humiliated. "We will contest this. Arthur," he spat. "We will tie this up in court for years. We will prove she was incompetent." "Good luck, Richard," Vance said calmly, closing his folder. "But I warn you, the legal fees alone will cost you far more than $1.63. And since you no longer have access to the Sterling Trust, I suggest you be careful with your spending." My father turned purple again. But he didn't say anything. He knew Vance was right. Without the inheritance, they were leveraging debt against assets they did not own. "Come on, Preston, Elena," he snapped. "Let us get out of here. The smell of failure is overwhelming." They marched out of the room, heads held high, clinging to the shreds of their dignity. They did not look back at me. When the heavy door clicked shut, the silence that rushed back into the room was different. It was not cold anymore. Mr. Vance took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at me, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. "They are gone, Miss Windermere." I looked down at the deed in my hand. The address was typed in bold letters, a place I had never seen, a place they called a garbage dump. "Mr. Vance," I said, Is it really just a ruin, Mr.?" Vance leaned forward. He lowered his voice. "Even though we were alone, your grandmother loved that place, Kara. She went there often, before she got too sick. She never told your father because he would have sold it." He paused, his eyes twinkling. "She told me that you have a talent for seeing the beauty in things other people throw away. She said you are the only one who has the eyes to see." I remembered the weight of the rusty key in my pocket. "Look at the core," she had said. "I understand." I said, though I didn't. Not fully. He handed me a set of keys. There were 2 modern keys for the gate and the front door, but I knew there was a third key, the one burning a hole in my pocket. That was the real inheritance. "Go to the hollow, Kara," Mr. Vance said softly. "And when you get there, remember who you are, remember what you do. You restore things." I stood up, clutching the deed to my chest. I picked up the dollar bill my brother had thrown at me and tucked it into my purse. "Thank you, Arthur." I walked out of the glass tower and onto the busy street. The wind was biting, but for the first time in months, I felt warm. My family thought they had left me with nothing but a burden. They thought they had won by making me the punchline of their joke. But as I hailed a taxi, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Mr. Vance had looked at me. It wasn't pity, it was anticipation. I was the queen of the junk pile, and I had a feeling my reign was just beginning. The drive to the hollow took 4 hours, taking me further and further away from the steel canyons of the city and into the deep, overgrown heart of upstate New York. The GPS on my phone flickered as the signal died, leaving me to navigate by memory and the fading road signs that looked like they had not been replaced since the 1970s. When I finally turned onto the gravel lane that marked the property line, my heart sank. My family had not been exaggerating. It was a ruin. The house sat on a rise overlooking a valley of tangled weeds and dead trees. It was a Victorian structure, or at least it had been once. Now, it was a skeletal gray thing, its paint stripped away by decades of wind and rain. The porch sagged dangerously to the left, and the windows were boarded up with plywood that had turned black with rot. Vines thick as my arm choked the chimney, and the roof looked like it was missing more shingles than it retained. I parked my car next to what used to be a fountain, but was now just a cracked concrete bowl filled with stagnant green water. I stepped out, the gravel crunching loudly under my boots. The silence here was absolute, heavy, and unnerving. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from my mother. "The locks on the apartment have been changed. The doorman has your boxes in the lobby. You have 24 hours to collect them before we have them thrown in the dumpster. Do not ask for money. You have your inheritance." I stared at the screen until it went dark. They had moved fast. They wanted to make sure I felt the full weight of my poverty immediately. I was homeless, jobless, and standing in front of a house that looked like it should be condemned. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the smell of damp earth and pine needles. "Fine," I said aloud, my voice sounding small in the vast open air. "Fine." I walked up the rotting steps, testing each one before putting my full weight down. I used the modern key Mr. Vance had given me to unlock the front door. It groaned in protest, the hinges screaming as I pushed it open. Inside, it smelled of dust and mouse droppings, but surprisingly, it was dry. I clicked on my heavy-duty flashlight and swept the beam across the room. The furniture was draped in white sheets that had turned gray with dust. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like chandeliers of silk. But as I walked through the gloom, my professional instincts kicked in. I ran a hand along the doorframe. I stopped. I rubbed the wood with my thumb, clearing away a layer of grime. Beneath the dirt, the grain was tight, dark, and reddish-brown. I pulled out my pocket knife and gently scraped a tiny section of the banister. Cuban mahogany. I gasped. The importation of this wood had been banned for decades. It was incredibly rare, incredibly valuable, and rot-resistant. I moved to the floorboards, kneeling to inspect them under the light. American chestnut, extinct since the blight in the early 20th century. I stood up, looking at the house with new eyes. To my father and Preston, this was a rotting shack because they only saw the peeling paint. But to me, a restorationist, I saw the bones. The structure was not rotting. It was armored in some of the most precious lumber on the planet. The house itself was a treasure, hidden in plain sight under a mask of neglect. I spent the next 3 days living in a camping tent I pitched in the living room, terrified that the roof might leak, though it held strong through a thunderstorm on the second night. I scrubbed, I swept, I cleared away 50 years of abandonment. On the fourth night, I sat on the floor by the lantern light, opening the package I had rescued from the lobby before leaving the city. It was the diary. Grandfather's war diary that I had restored for Grandma. I flipped through the pages, admiring the ink I had stabilized. Near the back of the book, tucked between 2 pages describing a battle in France, there was a sketch I had glossed over before. It was a drawing of a floor plan. I had assumed it was a bunker or a safe house from the war. But as I looked at it now, in the flickering light of this house, I recognized the shape of the living room fireplace. There was a small arrow drawn in the corner of the sketch, pointing to a spot beneath the main staircase. The caption in Grandfather's handwriting read simply, "For the rainy day." My pulse quickened. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the space under the stairs. It was a small closet, filled with old brooms and rusted buckets. I dragged everything out. Coughing in the cloud of dust, the floor was covered in a grimy linoleum sheet. I pulled out my knife and slashed the linoleum, peeling it back. Beneath it were the chestnut floorboards. But one board was shorter than the others. I pressed on one end. It didn't move. I pressed on the other. Nothing. I looked at the sketch again. The arrow pointed to a knot in the wood. I found the knot in the floorboard. It looked natural. But when I pushed down on it with my thumb, I felt a mechanical click. The board popped up. Beneath it was a keyhole, set directly into the subfloor. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the rusty iron key Grandma had given me on her deathbed. My hand was trembling. "It has to fit," I whispered. I slid the key into the hole. It was stiff, gritty with age. I used both hands and turned. Clunk. The sound was heavy. The sound of a serious, well-oiled mechanism engaging deep underground. A section of the floor, about 3 feet by 3 feet, hissed with the sound of pneumatic hydraulics and slowly lifted upward, revealing a set of concrete stairs descending into the darkness. The air that wafted up was not musty. It smelled of climate control. It smelled of old paper and varnish. It smelled like the archive room at the museum. I descended the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. At the bottom, I found a light switch and flipped it. Humming sounds filled the air as overhead industrial lights flickered on, illuminating a space that ran the entire length of the house. I dropped to my knees. It was not a basement. It was a vault. Rows of shelving units lined the walls, packed with leather-bound books. Canvases were stacked in vertical racks, covered in protective archival cloth. Furniture chairs, tables, bureaus sat on raised pallets, draped in muslin. I scrambled to the nearest rack and pulled the cover off a painting. I stopped breathing. It was a landscape, a turbulent storm over a harbor. The brushwork was aggressive, the light ethereal. I looked at the signature in the corner, J.M. Turner. I staggered back. This painting had been listed as lost at sea in 1945. It was worth tens of millions of dollars on its own. I moved to the bookshelves. First editions, Dickens, Austen, Hemingway, signed, pristine. I moved to the furniture, a highboy chest that I recognized from a textbook on 18th century American cabinetry. It was a Goddard and Townsend piece, one of only a handful in existence. My grandmother had not just left me a house. She had left me the Sterling Collection, a legendary accumulation of art and history that my grandfather was rumored to have hidden away to protect it from the government seizures during the war, and which the family believed had been destroyed. My parents thought they were fighting over $50 million in stocks and real estate. I was standing in a room that was conservatively worth 4 times that amount. On a small drafting table in the center of the room, there was a single white envelope with my name on it. I opened it with shaking fingers. My dearest Kara, if you are reading this, then you found the courage to look beneath the surface. Your grandfather and I spent our lives protecting these things. Not because they were expensive, but because they were beautiful. Your father and brother never understood that. They only saw the price tag, never the soul. They think I have left you nothing. I have left you everything. But hear me well, Kara. This is not just wealth. This is leverage. This is freedom. Do not let them take it from you. They will try. They will smell the money like sharks in the water. Be smarter than them. Be patient. And when the time is right, show them what a failure can do. Love, Grandma. I sank into the chair, a Chippendale chair that probably cost more than Preston's annual bonus, and wept. I cried for the trust she had placed in me. I cried for the sheer, overwhelming relief of knowing I wasn't crazy. My phone rang, shattering the moment. I wiped my eyes and looked at the screen. Preston. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I needed to sound beaten. I needed to sound like the victim they wanted me to be. "Hello," I said, my voice thick with fake tears. "Kara." Preston's voice was fast, clipped, and breathless. "Where are you?" "I am at the Hollow." "Preston, where else would I be? You evicted me." Right. Look, I am calling because I am worried about you. You are worried about me." "Yes." "I mean, living in that dump. It is not safe. Kara, Dad was saying the structure is unsound. We do not want you getting hurt." I looked around at the climate-controlled, steel-reinforced bunker filled with masterpieces. "It is okay. Preston, I am managing." "Listen." Preston cut me off. "I have a proposition. I know you are broke. I know you have no job. I want to help you out. Help me. I will buy the property from you." I paused. "Why would you want this place?" "You said it was a garbage dump. It is. It absolutely is. But I have a friend who needs a tax write-off. A loss. You know. He buys the land, tears down the shack, donates the empty lot to the state. It helps him. It helps you. How much I asked? $50,000. Preston said quickly, cash. Today. I can wire it to you right now. You can get a nice apartment. Maybe start a little business. $50,000 for a property that contained $200 million in art. I frowned. He sounded too eager. Preston never did anything for charity. If he was offering $50,000, it meant he needed this land. I do not know. Preston, Grandma left it to me. Kara, do not be stupid, he shouted, losing his composure. It is a pile of wood. You cannot eat wood. Take the money. Why are you yelling? I asked softly. Are you in trouble? Preston, silence on the other end. Then a nervous laugh. Trouble me. I am the director of Sterling Capital. I am rich. Kara, I am trying to save you from starvation. Just think about it. I will send over a contract. Sign it. He hung up. I sat there, holding the phone. He was desperate. I could hear it in the tremor of his voice. He had leveraged his inheritance, the inheritance he didn't get, and now the bills were coming due. He needed assets. He probably heard a rumor that the Highway Commission was planning an expansion near here, or maybe he just needed any piece of real estate to show his creditors as collateral. He wanted to steal my inheritance for $50,000. I stood up and walked to the drafting table. I picked up the landline phone that was connected in the bunker. My grandfather really had thought of everything. I dialed a number I had memorized years ago. Elias, I said when the voice answered. Kara Elias Thorne answered. He was the head appraiser at the National Gallery, a man who had taught me everything I knew about restoration, and one of the few people on earth with impeccable discretion. Why are you calling me on a landline? I need you to come to upstate New York. Elias, tonight, and tell no one. Kara, I am in the middle of a gala. Elias, I said, looking at the Turner painting. I am staring at a seascape signed by J.M.W. Turner, and I think I found the lost Gutenberg Bible on the shelf behind it. There was a long silence on the line, then the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. Send me the coordinates, Elias said, his voice deadly serious. I am leaving now. I hung up the phone. I looked at the vast room of treasures. Preston wanted a war. He had no idea what kind of arsenal I was sitting on. He was playing checkers with pennies. I was about to play chess with kings. The harassment began exactly 24 hours after I hung up on Preston. It started small, like the first pebbles of a landslide. I was in the kitchen, boiling water on a camping stove because the gas had not been turned on yet. When a rock shattered the front window, the glass exploded inward, showering the floor with jagged shards. I dropped to the ground, heart pounding, and crawled to the wall. Outside, an engine roared. I peeked over the sill just in time to see a beat-up pickup truck peeling out of the overgrown driveway, gravel spraying in its wake. When I went outside to investigate, I found the front of the house defaced. Bright red spray paint slashed across the gray siding, cellar burn. I stared at the words. It was crude. It was violent. And it reeked of Preston's desperation. He wasn't just asking anymore. He was demanding. I did not call the police. The local sheriff was an old drinking buddy of my father's. I knew better than to expect help there. Instead, I drove into the nearest town and bought every wireless security camera the hardware store had in stock. I spent the next 2 days mounting them in the trees, under the eaves, and hidden in the tall grass along the driveway. If Preston wanted to play dirty, I would make sure every speck of dirt was recorded in high definition. On the third day, Preston himself arrived. He pulled up in his sleek black sports car, which looked ridiculously out of place parked next to the stagnant fountain. He stepped out, wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than the truck that had vandalized my house. He looked around at the broken window and the spray paint with a feigned expression of shock. Kara, he called out, walking up the steps. My God, what happened here? I met him on the porch. I had a crowbar in my hand. I wasn't planning to use it, but I like the weight of it. You tell me. Preston, I said coldly. He held up his hands in a gesture of innocence. Mikara, I am just seeing this now. This neighborhood. I told you it wasn't safe. Junkies, vandals. You cannot live like this. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Look, I brought the contract. $50,000. I increased it to 55. I am worried about you. Sis, let me take this burden off your hands. You sign the deed over to me, and you can be in a hotel in the city by tonight. Safe, warm, rich. I looked at him, really looked at him. Beneath the expensive tan and the perfect teeth, he was sweating. His eyes were darting around, checking the perimeter. He wasn't looking at the house. He was looking through it, calculating. Why do you want it so bad? Preston, I asked. It is a burden. Right, it is. He insisted, his voice cracking slightly. But I am the big brother. It is my job to handle the heavy lifting. Dad agrees. We want to protect you. Protect me like you protected Grandma, I asked. His face hardened. He took a step forward, invading my personal space. The charm evaporated. Do not push me. Kara, you are out of your depth. You are sitting on a piece of dirt that is going to get you hurt. Take the money. It is the only offer you are going to get. I gripped the crowbar tighter. Get off my property. Preston. He stared at me, his jaw working. For a second, I thought he might hit me. Then he sneered. Fine. Play the martyr. See how long you last when the winter comes, or when the vandals come back. He turned and stormed back to his car. As he reversed out, I checked my phone. The camera hidden in the birdhouse had captured his face perfectly, including the moment his mask slipped and the threat in his eyes became real. I retreated to the sanctuary of the vault. It was the only place I felt safe. I had set up a workspace on the drafting table, surrounded by the silent, comforting presence of history. While sorting through a box of Grandma's personal correspondence, I found a leather folder labeled Sterling Enterprises, 1980. I opened it. Inside were share certificates, preferred stock in the family company, issued to Beatrice Sterling, thousands of shares. I frowned. My father had always told us that Grandma had cashed out her shares decades ago to buy the Hamptons estate. He said she had no equity left in the company. I dug deeper into the box. I found transfer documents dated 15 years ago. They authorized the transfer of all Grandma's shares to Richard Sterling. I looked at the signature at the bottom, Beatrice Sterling. It was smooth, flowing, and confident. I pulled out Grandma's diary from the same year. Her arthritis had been terrible that winter. Her handwriting in the diary was jagged, shaky, barely legible. I placed the two signatures side by side. They did not match. My blood ran cold. My father had forged her signature. He had stolen her company shares that paid massive dividends and lied about it for 15 years. That was where the money for the yachts and the parties had come from. It wasn't business acumen. It was theft. I scanned the documents and saved them to an encrypted cloud server. Then I printed copies and put them in a safe. This was ammunition. The next morning, I received a phone call from my boss at the Archive Haven. Kara, he said, his voice strained. I do not know how to say this. What is it? Mr. Henderson. We have had an audit. Some rare prints are missing from the storage room. My stomach dropped. I did not take them. I know. Kara, I know you didn't. But we received an anonymous tip, and the police came. They found one of the prints in your locker. My locker. I haven't been there in a week, I know. But the board is pressuring me. They are threatening to pull our funding if we do not act. I have to let you go. Kara, effective immediately. Preston. It had to be Preston. He was trying to cut off my only lifeline, to starve me out. Mr. Henderson, I said, keeping my voice steady. Check the security footage. You will see who planted it. The footage from that hallway was corrupted. Kara, look, I am sorry. I will write you a reference. But I cannot keep you on. He hung up. I sat in the silence of the dusty living room. I had lost my job, my career, my reputation. I should have been devastated. But strangely, I felt a calm resolve settle over me. They were throwing everything they had at me because they were terrified. You don't bomb a bridge unless you are afraid of what is crossing it. I went back down to the vault. I had work to do. Elias arrived 2 nights later, driving a nondescript rental van. He was a small man with wild white hair and thick glasses, looking every bit the eccentric genius he was. When I led him down into the vault, he stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He took off his glasses. He wiped them. He put them back on. "Dear God," he whispered. He spent 12 hours going through the collection. He moved from painting to sculpture to manuscript, muttering to himself, his hands shaking with excitement. "Kara," he said finally, collapsing onto a crate, "do you have any idea what this is?" "Tell me," I said. "That Turner painting, the one you called about, it is real. It is the storm off Margate. It hasn't been seen since 1942. Conservatively, 15 million. I nodded. "And the rest?" He gestured vaguely at the room. "There is a draft of the Declaration of Independence here. Kara, there is a Fabergé egg wrapped in a dish rag over there. The furniture alone is worth 20 million. Total, I asked. He looked me in the eye. "If you put this on the market slowly, so you don't crash the prices, 200 million, maybe more, $200 million. My family was fighting for scraps. They were killing each other for 50 million, while I was sleeping on top of an empire. But Elias," I said, "I cannot sell it. Not yet. If I list these now, my family will see. They will claim the will was invalid. They will say Grandma didn't know these things were here and that they belong to the general estate. They will tie me up in court until I'm dead." Elias nodded grimly. "You are right. You need to secure your title. You need to prove that she intended for you specifically to have these specific items." I showed him Grandma's letter. "Use it to be free. It is vague," Elias said. "A judge might sway either way, especially with your father's lawyers." "Then I need time," I said. "I need them to think I am broke. I need them to think I am desperate." I looked at the Turner painting. "Elias, can you take the small items? The jewelry, the coins, things I can liquidate quietly without making headlines?" He nodded. "I have buyers in Zurich. Private collectors. No questions asked. Good. I need cash. I need to hire the best shark of a lawyer in New York, and I need to pay for a very expensive renovation." "Why renovation?" I smiled. "Because I am going to invite them here." The plan formed in my mind like a complex restoration project. I would play the part they wrote for me. The defeated sister, the desperate pauper. I called Preston the next day. I tried to sound broken. I made sure my voice trembled. "Preston." "It is Kara." He answered on the first ring. "Kara, are you ready to be sensible? I don't know what to do. I lost my job. Preston, I have no money for food. The window is broken and it is freezing in here." "That is terrible," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I told you it would be hard. I cannot sign the deed over yet." I said, "There is a lien on the property. From an old unpaid tax bill I found. It will take a few weeks to clear." "How long?" he demanded sharply. 2 weeks? Maybe 3? He swore under his breath. "I don't have 3 weeks. I mean, the offer might not stand that long. Please, Preston," I begged, "I will sell it to you. I promise. Just give me time to clear the title so it is legal. I don't want to get in trouble." He hesitated. He was greedy, but he was also cautious about legal paperwork. "Fine," he snapped. 3 weeks, but I want a signed letter of intent. Today, saying you will sell to me exclusively for $55,000. I will write it." I said. I hung up and typed out the letter. It was legally binding. Yes, but it was binding for a sale of the property known as the Hollow, consisting of the land and the residential structure. It did not mention the contents. It did not mention the vault. And most importantly, it bought me time. What I didn't know was that Preston couldn't wait 3 weeks. He was already drowning. I found out later, through the private investigator I hired with the first installment of money Elias sent from the sale of a diamond brooch. Preston had already leveraged the property. He had forged a deed using my name and shown it to his investors, who were actually loan sharks from the city. He told them he already owned the land and that he was just waiting for the zoning permits to build a luxury resort. He had borrowed $2 million against my house. If he didn't deliver the deed in a month, they wouldn't just sue him, they would break his legs. He was trapped, and a trapped animal is dangerous. I watched the security monitors. I saw his car drive by slowly every few nights. He was watching me. He was waiting. But he didn't know that I was watching him back. And he didn't know that every night, while he thought I was shivering in the cold, I was underground, polishing the silver that would drive the final nail into his coffin. I met Arthur Vance at a diner 3 towns over, a place where neither the coffee nor the clientele was impressive enough to attract anyone from the sterling social circle. He slid into the booth opposite me, looking out of place in his tailored suit against the cracked vinyl upholstery. "You look different." "Kara," he noted, stirring sugar into his black coffee. "Less fragile. I have been busy." "Arthur," I said, leaning forward. "I found the vault." He paused. "Spoon midair. I knew you would. Your grandmother said you had the eyes for it. But finding it is one thing, keeping it is another." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a heavy key, similar to the one for a safety deposit box. Beatrice was not naive. "Kara, she knew about the missing shares. She knew your father forged her signature 15 years ago. Then why didn't she stop him?" I asked, feeling a flash of anger. Why did she let him parade around like he owned the world? Because she was protecting the family name. He sighed, and because she was waiting. She knew that if she exposed him then, the scandal would destroy everything, including the trust fund she had set up for your education. She played the long game. She collected evidence. He slid the key across the sticky table. "This opens box 404 at First National. Inside, you will find the original share certificates, forensic analysis of the forged transfer documents, and something else, something on Preston. Preston, your brother has been creative with the hedge fund's accounting. Beatrice had a private investigator looking into him for the last 2 years. He is running a Ponzi scheme, Kara. He is paying old investors with new money, and he is skimming off the top to fund his lifestyle." I stared at the key. It wasn't just an inheritance anymore. It was a weapon. I went to the bank immediately after breakfast. The contents of box 404 were explosive. There were bank statements showing transfers from the company accounts to offshore shell companies controlled by Preston. There were emails printed out and preserved where my father discussed fixing the tax audit with a bribe. I sat in the bank's private viewing room, reading through the destruction of my family's reputation. I should have felt sad, but all I felt was the cold, hard satisfaction of a puzzle piece snapping into place. 2 days later, the summons came. Not a legal summons, but a family one. Dinner at the estate, 7 p.m., attendance mandatory. We need to settle the property issue. It was a text from my mother, short, imperious. I dressed carefully for the occasion. I wore my old clothes, a slightly frayed cardigan, and jeans that had seen better days. I didn't wear makeup. I wanted to look tired. I wanted to look beaten. When I arrived at the Hamptons estate, the atmosphere was different from the birthday party. The house felt hollow. The staff was gone, likely let go to save money. My mother answered the door herself, looking frazzled, her hair not quite as perfect as usual. "Come in," she snapped. "They are in the study." My father and Preston were waiting. Preston was pacing, a glass of scotch in his hand. My father was sitting behind the desk, Grandma's desk, trying to look authoritative, but his eyes were darting nervously. "Sit down. Kara," Father said. I sat on the edge of the chair, clutching my purse. Inside, my phone was recording. "Let us cut the crap," Preston said, slamming his glass down. "The 3 weeks are almost up. We need the deed. Now. I told you," I stammered, making my voice small. "The lien is still there. I am trying to clear it. We do not have time for you to try." Father shouted, "Do you have any idea the pressure we are under? The market is crashing. We need liquidity. That property is the only unencumbered asset we have left to leverage." "But it is just a shack," I said innocently. "You said it was worthless. Why do you need a shack so badly? Because the land has value, Preston yelled. I have a developer lined up. They want to build condos, but they need the land now. If you don't sign, the deal falls through. And we lose a lot of money. He was lying. There was no developer. There were only loan sharks. I cannot sign if it is illegal, I whispered. Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat, my mother hissed, stepping forward. We raised you, we fed you, and now, when the family is in crisis, you are holding out on us. We will sue you. Father threatened. We will sue you for elder abuse. We will claim you manipulated mother into changing the will. We will drag your name through the mud so thoroughly you will never get a job in this country again. I looked down at my hands, hiding a smile. Elder abuse, I asked softly, like when you forged her signature to steal her shares in 1990. The room went deadly silent. My father's face drained of color. What did you say? He whispered. Or maybe, I continued, looking at Preston. Fraud. Like using the client fund to pay for your gambling debts in Vegas or laundering money through the Cayman shells. Preston dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, amber liquid soaking into the rug. Where did you hear that he choked out? Grandma knew, I said. Looking up, my voice was steady now. She knew everything. She told me. You are lying. Mother screeched. She was senile. She didn't know what day it was. She knew enough to leave me the evidence. I lied. Well, partially lied. I had the evidence, but Grandma hadn't handed it to me directly. Preston lunged across the desk. Give it to me. Give me the files. Sit down. Preston, I snapped. The command was so sharp, so unlike me, that he actually froze. I stood up. I am willing to make a deal. A deal, Father asked, his eyes narrowing. I will sign the property over to you. The land, the house, everything. You will, Preston asked, hope warring with suspicion in his eyes. Yes, on one condition. We sign a preliminary agreement today. It states that I agree to sell the property to Preston for $55,000, pending a third-party audit of the property's structural integrity. An audit. Preston frowned. Why? Because I don't want to be liable if the house collapses on your new condos. I said, it is a standard liability clause. It will take 2 weeks. 2 weeks is too long, Preston muttered. It is the only offer I am making. I said, you get the paper today. You can show your developer that you have the contract. That should satisfy them for a few weeks. Right? Preston looked at Father. They exchanged a look of desperate calculation. They needed something to show the creditors. A signed contract, even a preliminary one, might buy them the time they needed. Fine, Preston spat. We sign it. But if you back out, Kara, I swear to God I will kill you. I ignored the threat. I pulled the contract out of my bag. I had drafted it myself. With Mr. Vance's help, it looked standard. But buried in the fine print of the definitions section, Clause 4B stated that the seller reserves the right to remove any and all personal property, heirlooms, and non-structural fixtures prior to the final closing date. To them, personal property meant old clothes and trash. To me, it meant the entire Sterling collection. They signed it. They didn't even read the fine print. They were too busy thinking about the money. I walked out of that house with the signed contract and the audio recording of their confessions. Preston had admitted he needed the money to cover his losses. Father had admitted Grandma shouldn't have kept the assets. It was all there. The next morning, I went to work. I didn't go to a job. I went to the offices of the Securities and Exchange Commission. I didn't go in the front door. I used a courier to deliver a thick manila envelope to the head of the Enforcement Division. It contained copies of the bank statements, the forged signatures, and the emails. It was anonymous, but the evidence was irrefutable. Then, I met with the representatives from Heritage Auctions. I had chosen them because they were aggressive, global, and they loved a good story. We met in a private room at a hotel in the city. When I showed them the photos of the collection, the Turner, the furniture, the manuscripts, the lead auctioneer actually stopped breathing for a moment. Miss Windermere, he said, His voice hushed. This is the find of the century. We thought the sterling collection was a myth. It is real. I said, and I want to sell it, but I want to do it in a way that maximizes the impact. We can organize a dedicated gala, he said, his eyes lighting up. The lost treasures of the Sterling dynasty. We will invite the world press. I want it to happen in 2 weeks. I said, that is impossible. The cataloging alone. I have already cataloged it. I interrupted, sliding a flash drive across the table, every item, provenance, condition reports, high-resolution photos. It is all there. He looked at me with newfound respect. You are a professional. I am a restorationist. I said, I bring things back to the light. While heritage auctions began their covert preparations, Preston was busy digging his own grave. He took the preliminary contract I had signed and ran straight to his investors. I found out later that he didn't just show it to them. He used it to secure another loan. He borrowed another $500,000, promising them that the condo development was a sure thing and that he would pay them back double in a month. He was doubling down on a hand he had already lost. I watched it all unfold from my monitors at the Hollow. I saw him drive by, looking smug. I saw him bring a surveyor to the edge of the property to measure the land. He was so confident. He thought he had won. He thought he had outsmarted the failure, but the clock was ticking. The SEC was quietly opening a file. The auction house was printing invitations, and I was packing up the last of the treasures. The trucks came at night, unmarked. Climate-controlled semi-trucks. We moved fast and silent. The paintings, the furniture, the books, everything was loaded and whisked away to the auction house's secure vault in the city. By the time the sun came up, the Hollow was empty. It was just a rotting shell again, a true shack, just as my father had called it. I left the dollar bill my brother had thrown at me on the mantelpiece of the empty fireplace. It was the only thing left in the house. I stood on the porch one last time, looking out at the overgrown yard. You wanted the house. Preston, I whispered. You can have it. I got in my car and drove away. I didn't look back. The next time I saw my family, it wouldn't be as a victim. It would be as the woman who owned the board they were trying to play on. The storm broke on a Tuesday morning, not with rain, but with a fax. It arrived at the headquarters of Sterling Capital at 9:15, bearing the seal of the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was a formal notification of investigation and an immediate freeze of all assets associated with Preston Sterling and the primary hedge fund accounts. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it. Bad news in the financial world travels faster than light. By 10 o'clock, Preston's credit cards were declining at the coffee shop downstairs. By 11, the bank had locked him out of the company server. But the SEC was the polite kind of trouble. The other kind arrived at the Hamptons estate at noon. I was sitting in a hotel room in the city, monitoring the security feed from the Hollow on my laptop. I saw a black SUV pull up to the front gate of my property. 2 men got out. They were not wearing suits. They looked like the kind of men who broke things for a living. They hopped the fence, walked up to the porch, and banged on the door. When no one answered, one of them took a baseball bat to the mailbox, smashing it into splinters. They were looking for Preston, and when they didn't find him at my place, they went to where he really lived. My phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was a shriek of pure terror. Kara. You have to sign the deed now today. What is wrong? Mother, I asked calmly, sipping my tea. There are men here, at the gate. They say Preston owes them money. They say they are going to burn the house down. Call the police, I suggested. We cannot call the police, she screamed. You know we cannot. Just give Preston the land. He needs the collateral to make them go away. I looked at the clock. It was time. Meet me at the Hollow in 2 hours. I said, bring Preston. Bring Dad. We will settle this. I hung up before she could answer. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The Kara who wore stained cardigans and apologized for existing was gone. I put on a tailored charcoal suit that I had bought with the advance from the auction house. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, professional chignon. I applied red lipstick, a shade my grandmother used to wear. I looked like a sterling, the only real one left. I arrived at the Hollow 10 minutes before they did. Mr. Vance was already there, standing by his car with 2 uniformed police officers and a private security detail I had hired. We waited on the porch. The house behind me was empty, a hollow shell stripped of its treasures. The windows were still boarded up, the spray paint still slashing red across the siding. The Sterling family arrived in a convoy of panic. Preston's sports car skidded on the gravel, followed closely by my father's sedan. They spilled out of the cars like refugees from a shipwreck. Preston looked manic. His hair was wild, his shirt untucked. My mother was crying, her mascara running down her face. My father looked gray, clutching a briefcase as if it contained his last breath. They ran up the driveway. Not seeing the police cars hidden behind the overgrown hedges, Kara Preston yelled, sprinting toward me, "Give me the papers! Give me the keys!" He charged up the stairs. "Stop right there!" A deep voice boomed. The 2 police officers stepped out from the shadows of the porch. My private bodyguard, a massive man named Tiny, moved in front of me, crossing his arms. Preston skidded to a halt, nearly tripping over his own feet. My parents froze behind him. "What? What is this?" Father stammered, looking at the uniforms. "Officers," I said, my voice cool and projecting clearly over the yard. "These are the people who have been harassing me." "Harassing you," Preston screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "We are your family. We are here to buy the house." "You agreed." I agreed to a preliminary discussion pending an audit. I corrected, but given the recent vandalism, I pointed to the broken window and the spray paint and the threats I have received. "I no longer feel safe selling to you." "You little witch." Preston lunged forward, his hands reaching for my throat. Tiny didn't even flinch. He simply extended one arm and shoved Preston back. Preston flew backward, landing hard on the gravel. "Assault. Officer, Mr. Vance said, taking notes on a small pad. "That is another count." My mother rushed to Preston, helping him up. "Kara, stop this. Those men are coming. They are going to hurt him. We need the money from the land." "The land?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You think this land is going to save you?" "It is worth 50,000, Preston gasped, clutching his ribs. "I can leverage it for more. I have a deal." I looked at him with genuine pity. "You really don't get it, do you?" I turned and unlocked the front door. "Officer, I would like to report a break-in," I said. "Last week, someone forced entry into my home. I believe they were looking for something valuable. Would you like to see?" I pushed the door open. Preston and my parents pushed past the officers, desperate to get inside, desperate to claim their prize. They burst into the living room and stopped dead. The room was empty, not just empty of furniture. The tent was gone. The camping stove was gone. But more importantly, the secret door under the stairs was wide open. Preston ran to it. He looked down into the vault. It was gutted. The shelves were bare. The racks were empty. The millions of dollars in art, books, and history that had filled that space were gone. Only dust motes danced in the beam of the industrial lights. "Where is it?" Preston whispered. "Where is what I asked?" Leaning against the doorframe. The stuff. The things I saw the manifest. I saw the old inventory logs in Dad's files. There was supposed to be art gold. My father turned to me, his face a mask of horror. "You knew. You knew about the collection." "Collection?" I asked innocently. "Oh, you mean the junk inside the rotting shack." "You stole it," Mother shrieked. "You stole our inheritance." I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. Stole. How can I steal what was given to me? The will was clear. The property known as the Hollow and all contents contained within. You signed the will. You mocked me for it. You threw a dollar bill at me and told me to enjoy my trash. "But that is worth millions," Preston wailed. "Is it?" I asked. "I thought it was just wood and raccoon droppings." "That is what you told me." "Right, Preston. When you tried to swindle me out of it for $50,000, I walked over to the mantelpiece. I picked up the single dollar bill I had left there. I walked up to my father and tucked it into his breast pocket. "Here," I said softly. "You dropped this. You cannot do this, Father whispered, grabbing my arm. We are ruined. Kara, the SEC, the loans. If we don't have capital, we go to jail. Then you should have thought about that before you stole Grandma's shares, I said, pulling my arm away. Preston looked around the empty room, his eyes wild. He grabbed a piece of loose molding from the wall and smashed it against the floor. Where is it? Tell me where you hid it. I checked my watch. Actually, that reminds me. I said, I have an invitation for you. I pulled 3 cream-colored envelopes from my purse. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, the grand ballroom at the Pierre Hotel. What is this? Mother asked, taking the envelope with trembling fingers. It is an auction, I said. The lost treasures of the Sterling dynasty. Preston's knees gave out. He sank to the floor, staring at me. You are selling it, he whispered. I am auctioning it, I corrected. To people who actually appreciate history, not to people who would leverage a Da Vinci to pay off a bookie. You have to stop it. Father begged, you have to give us the proceeds. We are family. Family. I stepped closer to him. Family doesn't evict their daughter. Family doesn't call their sister a failure. Family doesn't wait for their mother to die so they can loot her corpse. I turned to the police officers. Officers, these people are trespassing. I have video evidence of this man. I pointed to Preston vandalizing my property last week. I would like to press charges. The officers stepped forward. Mr. Sterling, you need to come with us. No, Preston shouted, scrambling backward. No, I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, the officer said, pulling out handcuffs as they dragged Preston out, kicking and screaming. My mother collapsed into my father's arms, sobbing. My father looked at me, his eyes pleading. Kara, please, help us. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me a bad investment. I am just doing what Grandma wanted. Dad, I am cleaning house. I walked out onto the porch, leaving them in the empty, dusty room that had once held a fortune they were too blind to see. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown grass. See you at the auction. I called back over my shoulder. Don't be late. I hear the opening bid for the Turner is $15 million. I got into my car. Mr. Vance sat in the passenger seat. He was smiling. That was brutal. He said, it was necessary. I replied. I drove away, leaving the police lights flashing in my rearview mirror. The facade had cracked. The rot was exposed. And tomorrow night, the whole world would see exactly what the Sterling legacy was really worth. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel had not seen a gathering like this in a decade. The air was thick with the scent of white orchids and the murmuring of the city's elite. I stood backstage, watching the feed from the cameras monitoring the entrance. I adjusted the silk lapel of my tuxedo, a stark, masculine contrast to the sea of sequined gowns out on the floor. Tonight was not about beauty. It was about power. I had named the event the Beatrice Sterling Legacy Gala. The press had turned out in force, lured by the rumors of a lost fortune and the scent of scandal that had been drifting around my family name for the last 48 hours. The New York Times arts editor was there. The head of the Metropolitan Museum was sipping champagne near the center stage. And, inevitably, the sharks of Wall Street were circling, smelling blood in the water. At 7:15, the Sterling family arrived. They walked in with their heads held high, but I could see the cracks in the porcelain. My father, Richard, looked thinner than he had 2 days ago, his suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. My mother, Elena, was smiling too widely, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting an assassin to jump out from behind the ice sculpture. And Preston. My brother had made bail that morning, his lawyers working overtime to keep him out of a cell just long enough to attend this event. He looked manic. He was sweating. Despite the air conditioning, he was shaking hands too vigorously, laughing too loudly. They were desperate. They had come here believing that I was going to sell off a few dusty antiques and that they could bully me into handing over the check to save them from the financial abyss. They still thought I was selling junk from a shack. I signaled the stage manager. It was time. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, plunging the hundreds of guests into a hushed darkness. A single spotlight cut through the gloom, illuminating me as I walked onto the center stage. There was a ripple of applause, polite but confused. They knew me only as the quiet daughter, the failure, the one who wasn't Preston. "Good evening," I said, my voice amplified clearly through the speakers. "Thank you all for coming." I looked down at the front row. My family sat there. Preston was glaring at me, tapping his foot. My mother was clutching her purse like a shield. For 80 years, my grandmother, Beatrice Sterling, was a fixture of this city. I continued, "You knew her as a philanthropist, you knew her as a hostess, but very few of you knew her as a guardian." I paused, letting the silence stretch. My family believed that Beatrice Sterling had lost her mind in her final years. They believed she had squandered her wealth. They believed that when she passed, she left behind nothing but a decaying house in upstate New York. I saw my father flinch. He whispered something to my mother, likely assuring her that I was just embarrassing myself. But my grandmother taught me that true value is rarely found on the surface. I said, "She taught me that while some people look at a piece of wood and see rot, others look at it and see history." I raised my hand. "Tonight, I invite you to see what she saved." I snapped my fingers. The heavy velvet curtains behind me swept open. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was a physical sound, a shockwave that rolled through the crowd. Behind me, displayed on velvet pedestals and lit by museum-quality halogen lights, was the Sterling collection. In the center, dominating the stage, was the J.M. Turner Seascape. The blues and grays of the storm swirled with a violence that seemed to move under the light. It was massive. It was breathtaking. To the left was the Gutenberg Bible, resting open on a silk cushion, its gold leaf illumination glittering. To the right, the Goddard and Townsend highboy chest stood tall and proud, its mahogany surface gleaming with the polish I had lovingly applied. I heard a glass shatter in the front row. I looked down. Preston had dropped his champagne flute. He was staring at the Turner painting with his mouth open, his face draining of all color until he looked like a corpse. My father was gripping the arms of his chair so hard, I thought the wood would snap. He knew. He looked at the painting, and he knew instantly that he was looking at $15 million. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice ringing out over their shock, "you are looking at The Storm off Margate, a masterpiece thought lost since 1942. You are looking at history that my grandmother protected from war, from theft, and from greed." Cameras flashed like a strobe light storm. The auctioneers from Heritage, standing at the ready, looked like they were trying to suppress giddy laughter. "The estimated value of the collection you see tonight," I announced, "is $200 million. My mother let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She slumped against my father, clutching her chest. $200 million. It was 4 times the entire value of the Sterling estate they had fought so dirty to keep. It was enough to pay off Preston's debts 100 times over. It was enough to buy the Hamptons estate 10 times, and it had been sitting under the floorboards of the house they called a garbage dump. I walked to the edge of the stage. My grandmother left this to me for a reason. I said, "She knew that wealth without purpose is just rot. That is why I am making an announcement." The room went silent again. Preston looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He thought I was going to say I was sharing it. He thought I was going to save them. 50% of the proceeds from tonight's auction will not go to me. I said, the hope in Preston's eyes flared brighter. They will be used to establish the Beatrice Sterling Foundation. I declared, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting struggling artists and funding the restoration of historical sites that have been neglected by those who should have cared for them. The crowd erupted in applause. It was thunderous, but in the front row, the Sterlings did not clap. They looked like they had been shot. 50%, $100 million. I was giving away $100 million money that could have saved their reputation. Money that could have kept them in yachts and penthouses to strangers. It was the ultimate power move. It showed them that the money they would kill for meant so little to me that I could give it away. I walked off the stage as the bidding began. The energy in the room was electric. The first item, a small Fabergé egg, sold for $2 million in under 60 seconds. I stood by the bar, watching the numbers climb on the digital display. Kara, I turned. My parents were pushing their way through the crowd toward me. My mother had fixed her smile, though it looked brittle enough to crack glass. My father had put on his patriarch mask. "Kara, darling," my mother cried out, reaching for me. "Oh, my God, I am so proud. We are so proud." She tried to hug me. I stepped back, letting her arms fall to her sides. "Proud?" I asked. "Of course," Father boomed, clapping a hand on my shoulder. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You need to fix this. Kara, the press is asking questions. You need to tell them that this was a family strategy, that we hid the assets together." What I asked, feigning confusion, "The fraud investigation," he whispered urgently. "If we say the assets were always part of the family trust, and that you are managing them for us, the SEC might back off. We can say it was a misunderstood allocation." "You want me to lie to the federal government?" I asked loudly. "Shh!" Father looked around frantically. "Just play along. We are family. We share this victory." Preston appeared behind them. He looked like a man on the brink of a psychotic break. "Kara," he pleaded, grabbing my arm. "You gave away half. Are you insane? That is $100 million. You cannot do that. We need that money. I need that money." I pulled my arm away. "I didn't give away your money." "Preston, I gave away mine." "Excuse me." "Ms. Windermere." A reporter from the Times had approached us, a cameraman trailing behind him. The bright light of the camera blinded us for a second. "Ms. Windermere," the reporter said, thrusting a microphone forward. "This is an incredible discovery. Can you tell us? Was your family aware of this collection? Your brother, Preston Sterling, is currently under investigation for liquidity issues. Did the family know they were sitting on this fortune?" My parents froze. This was their moment. If I said yes, they looked like geniuses. If I said no... My mother grabbed my hand, squeezing it painfully. Her nails dug into my palm. She smiled at the camera. "Oh, we always knew Beatrice had her secrets," she trilled, her voice shaking. "We just wanted Kara to have the honor of unveiling it. We are so happy for her. We have always supported her passion for restoration." I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had told me I looked like a maid. I looked at the father who had called me a failure. I looked at the brother who had tried to evict me. I gently pulled my hand away from hers. I took the microphone from the reporter. "Actually," I said, looking directly into the lens, "that is not quite true." The smile froze on my mother's face. "My family did not know about this collection," I said clearly. "In fact, when my grandmother passed away, they were very specific about what they wanted from her estate." I reached into my clutch purse. I pulled out a small plastic display case. Inside was the single dollar bill and the 63 cents. At the reading of the will, I continued, my voice steady and cold. My parents and my brother were given a choice. They could have honored my grandmother's wishes. Instead, they demanded she cut me out. They wanted the cash. They wanted the cars. I held up the dollar bill. The camera zoomed in. "This is what my grandmother left them." I said, $1, because that is what she believed their loyalty was worth. Gasps rippled through the circle of people that had formed around us. "And as for me," I went on, turning to look at my father, "they told me that the house containing this collection was a garbage dump. They threw this dollar at me and told me I was the queen of the junk pile." I handed the microphone back to the stunned reporter. My family rejected this legacy. I said, "They chose the dollar. I am simply respecting their decision." The silence was absolute. Then, the camera shutters went wild. My father looked like he had been slapped. His face turned a mottled red. My mother looked like she was going to faint. But Preston snapped. "You bitch," he screamed. He lunged at me, his hands clawing for my face. It happened in slow motion. The flashes of the cameras caught every frame of his contorted, rage-filled face. They caught my father trying to hold him back, They caught my mother screaming, and they caught the security guards tackling him to the ground before he could touch me. "Get off me," Preston shrieked, struggling against the guards on the polished floor of the ballroom. "It is my money. She stole it. It is mine." The guests were staring in horror. The prestigious gala had turned into a reality TV show nightmare. I stood over him, smoothing my dress. I looked down at my brother, pinned to the floor in his tuxedo, screaming about money while surrounded by the art he had been too stupid to see. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. The guards dragged him out. My parents, realizing the cameras were still rolling and that their reputation was disintegrating second by second, covered their faces and hurried after him. The reporter looked at me. "Ms. Windermere, do you have a comment?" I looked at the empty doorway where my family had just vanished. "Yes," I said. "I think the bidding on the Turner is stalling. Let us get back to the art." I turned and walked back toward the stage. Behind me, I could hear the buzz of hundreds of phones lighting up. Twitter was exploding. Instagram was live streaming. The headline was already writing itself. The sterling dollar. It was the end of their social life. It was the end of their business credibility. And as I watched the bid for the Gutenberg Bible climb past $25 million, I knew it was just the beginning of their punishment. The fallout from the gala was not a slow decline. It was a cliff edge. The moment the heavy glass doors of the Pierre Hotel closed behind the last guest, the illusion of the Sterling dynasty shattered completely. I did not have to wait long to see the first domino fall. In fact, I watched it happen from the balcony of the ballroom. Looking down at the street below where the paparazzi were still swarming like ants around a dropped piece of candy, Preston had been dragged out of the ballroom by security. But he did not make it to his limousine. As he stumbled onto the sidewalk, disheveled and screaming about his rights, 3 unmarked sedans pulled up to the curb. Men in windbreakers emerged. They were not the local police who had arrested him for trespassing at the Hollow. These men wore the insignias of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I watched as they approached my brother. I saw the color drain from his face, even from 3 stories up. They didn't ask him questions. They spun him around, slammed him against the hood of a car, and cuffed his hands behind his back. The flashing lights of the press cameras captured every second of it. The golden boy, the financial wizard, the heir to the Sterling name, was being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle like a common criminal. My parents were standing on the sidewalk, helpless. My mother was clutching her pearls, her mouth open in a silent scream. My father tried to step forward, tried to use his bluster and his connections, but an agent simply held up a hand and pushed him back. They were nobody now. They were just the parents of a fraudster. I turned away from the window. The auction was over. The final tally was staggering, $215 million. I walked back into the empty ballroom, where the staff was beginning to clean up the confetti. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. It wasn't joy. It was the absence of a weight I had been carrying for 32 years. The next morning, the second blow landed. I was at the temporary estate I had rented, a fortress of a house in Westchester, gated and secure, far away from the chaos of the city. I was drinking coffee and reading the newspapers. The headlines were brutal. Sterling silver turns to rust. Heir arrested for Ponzi scheme. The sister who sold the legacy. My phone buzzed. It was Mr. Vance. "Kara," he said, his voice grave but satisfied. "It is happening. The house I asked." "The house," he confirmed. "The bank just foreclosed on the Hamptons estate. The sheriff is there now executing the eviction order." I closed my eyes, picturing the scene, how I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Preston," Vance said. "He didn't just borrow from loan sharks. He forged a power of attorney document 6 months ago. He used the Hamptons estate as collateral for a massive business loan to cover his trading losses. When the SEC froze his assets and the accounts were exposed as empty, the bank called the note immediately, and my parents, they had no idea. They are being escorted off the property as we speak. They have nothing. Kara, Preston bet the roof over their heads on a hand he couldn't win." I hung up the phone. I sat in the garden for a long time, watching the leaves fall. I knew they would come. They had nowhere else to go. They had burned every bridge, alienated every friend, and sneered at every relative. I was the only one left. I was the failure, who had just made $200 million. They arrived at sunset. They came in a taxi. My father's luxury sedan had been leased in the company name, and the company was gone. My mother's car had been seized along with the house. They stood at the intercom of my gate, two small, gray figures in the dying light. Kara. My father's voice crackled over the speaker. It was broken, raspy. Kara, please, let us in. I buzzed the gate open. I met them on the front steps. I did not invite them inside. The house behind me was warm, lit with golden light, a sharp contrast to the cold autumn wind blowing through the yard. They looked like ghosts. My mother was wearing the same gown she had worn to the gala, now wrinkled and stained. Her hair was matted. She wasn't wearing her jewelry. I assumed she had pawned it that morning to pay for the taxi. My father, always so impeccable, looked shrunken in his suit. He hadn't shaved. Kara. Mother sobbed, rushing forward. Oh, thank God. Thank God. She tried to embrace me. I took a step back. She froze, her arms hanging empty in the air. We have lost everything, she wailed. They took the house. They took the cars. They even took my furs. Kara. We have nowhere to go. My father stepped up beside her. He tried to straighten his tie, a reflex of a dignity he no longer possessed. Preston. He made a mistake. Father said, his voice trembling. A business error. But we can fix this. We just need capital. Capital, I asked. We are family. Kara. He pleaded. Blood is thicker than water. You have done well. We are proud of you. But now you need to step up. You need to bail Preston out. You need to buy back the estate. He looked at me with those expectant eyes, the eyes of a man who had never been told no in his life. We need $5 million for Preston's legal defense, he continued, gaining a little confidence, and another 10 to settle the bank lien. It is a drop in the bucket for you now. I looked at them. I really looked at them. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They weren't apologizing for the years of neglect, for the eviction, for the insults. They were just demanding money because they felt entitled to it. I motioned to Tiny, my bodyguard, who was standing in the shadows holding a briefcase. He stepped forward and handed it to me. I opened the briefcase. I pulled out a file folder. I do not have $5 million for you, I said. My mother's face twisted. What, you just made $200 million? I ignored her. I opened the file. Do you recognize this? Father, I held up the bank transfer document from 1990, the one with the forged signature. Father squinted at it. Then he recoiled, as if I had held up a snake. Where did you get that? He whispered. Grandma kept everything. I said, she knew you stole her shares. She knew you forged her name to take control of the company. She let you get away with it because she didn't want you to go to prison. She loved you, even though you were a thief. I flipped to the next page. It was a forensic accounting report of Preston's hedge fund. And this, I said, is where Preston funneled the money. He wasn't investing. He was buying condos in Miami and gambling in Vegas. He stole from his clients. He stole from his friends. And in the end, he stole your house. I closed the file with a sharp snap. This is not bad luck. Father, this is not a business error. This is a crime scene. Kara, please, Mother begged, dropping to her knees on the cold stone. We are your parents. You cannot leave us on the street. We will die out there. You won't die, I said coldly. You are resourceful people. You survived stealing from your own mother. You will survive this. But we have nothing, she screamed. I looked down at her. You have exactly what you gave me. I reached into the briefcase again. I pulled out a heavy rectangular object wrapped in brown paper. I held it out to my father. Here, I said, I am not sending you away empty-handed. He took it, his hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. Hope flared in his eyes. He thought it was a stack of cash. He thought it was a deed to a house. "Open it," I commanded. He tore the paper. Under the porch light, the glass of the frame glinted. Inside the simple black frame, mounted on archival mat board, was a single, crisp $1 bill. My father stared at it. He made a sound like a dying animal. "What is this?" he choked out. "It is your inheritance." I said. I pointed to the inscription I had asked the framer to add in gold plate at the bottom. "The Sterling Legacy. Grandma left you $1. I said, my voice hard as iron. "And you threw it at me. You told me it was what I was worth. Well, I am returning the investment." I took a step back toward the door. "Use it to start over," I said. "I hear the bus fare to the city is exactly $2. You might need to find another dollar somewhere. But I am sure you can figure it out," Kara father roared, smashing the frame against the stone railing. The glass shattered. "You ungrateful, spiteful little, get off my property," I said. Tiny stepped forward, his massive bulk blocking the doorway. He cracked his knuckles. My parents looked at me. They looked at the warm light of the house they would never enter. They looked at the daughter they had thrown away, who was now the only Sterling standing. "We will sue you," Mother screamed, scrambling to her feet. "We will tell everyone what you did. Go ahead." I said, "Tell them how you tried to cheat a dead woman. Tell them how you lost a fortune because you were too arrogant to look in a damp basement." I turned my back on them. I walked into the house and pressed the button to close the heavy oak door. As the latch clicked shut, locking out the cold and the dark, I heard them. I heard my mother screaming my name. I heard my father cursing the world. I heard the sound of their despair echoing off the stone walls of my fortress. I walked to the window and watched through the blinds. The large iron gates at the end of the driveway began to close. My parents stood there, illuminated by the headlights of a passing car. They looked small. They looked pathetic. And as the gates clanged shut with a finality that shook the ground, they were gone. I turned away from the window. The phone rang again. It was Mr. Vance. "Kara," he said, "I just got word from the federal prosecutor, and they are charging Preston with 20 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny. The evidence you provided is airtight. He is looking at 15 years, minimum." I let out a long breath. "And the assets I asked?" "Gone," Vance said. "The government has seized everything to pay back the victims. Your parents are liable for the debts because they signed the guarantees. They are bankrupt. Kara, completely and totally bankrupt. Thank you." "Arthur," I said. I hung up the phone and walked into the living room. On the wall, hanging above the fireplace, was a new painting. It wasn't a Turner. It wasn't a masterpiece worth millions. It was a small, watercolor sketch of a garden. It was clumsy and amateurish. It was signed Beatrice, aged 12. It was the only thing I had kept from the collection. The only thing that had no market value, but meant everything. I sat down in the armchair and looked at it. The silence in the house was deep and peaceful. There were no more schemes, no more lies, no more fighting for scraps. Justice had not been swift, but it had been absolute. The scales were balanced. I poured myself a cup of tea. My hand was steady. The Sterling dynasty was dead. Long live the queen of the junk pile. 1 year can change the topography of a life just as drastically as a century can change a landscape. 12 months ago, I was sleeping in a tent in a rotting living room, shivering against the cold. Terrified of my own brother, I was the invisible daughter. I was the stain on the Sterling reputation. Today, the sun is shining on the fresh coat of slate-gray paint that adorns the hollow. The weeds are gone, replaced by a riot of wildflowers that I planted myself: coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, and wild indigo. The fountain, once a stagnant pool of algae, now sings with the sound of clear rushing water. I stood on the porch, watching the first visitors of the day walk up the gravel path. They moved with reverence, their voices hushed. Above the heavy oak door, a modest brass plaque gleamed in the morning light. The Beatrice Sterling Museum of Preservation. It was no longer a secret vault. It was a sanctuary open to the world. I had fulfilled my promise. I had turned the garbage dump into a beacon. Inside, the climate-controlled galleries were filled not just with the items I had kept from the auction, but with new acquisitions. I used the Foundation's money to buy back art that had been stolen during conflicts, artifacts that had been looted from indigenous tribes, and manuscripts that had been forgotten in damp basements. I hired a team of restorationists, young, hungry, passionate people like I had been, and I gave them a home. Ms. Windermere. I turned to see Sarah, my head archivist, holding a clipboard. "The tour group from the elementary school is here," she said, smiling. "They are very excited about the dinosaur bones." I smiled back. "Let them touch the replicas." "Sarah, Grandma always hated museums where you couldn't touch anything." Sarah nodded and hurried off. I took a deep breath of the air. It smelled of beeswax polish and old paper. It was the smell of my happiness. I walked to my office, which was located in the converted loft of the barn. My desk was covered in blueprints, but not for a building. They were for a company. 6 months ago. The bankruptcy proceedings for Sterling Capital had finally concluded. The assets were liquidated, the office furniture sold, and the brand name left in the dirt. No one wanted to buy a company associated with a massive Ponzi scheme. No one except me. I bought the shell of the company for pennies. I kept the name Sterling, but I stripped it of everything my father and brother had built. I fired the slick brokers in their Italian suits. I terminated the high-risk algorithms. I restructured it as a B Corp, a social enterprise dedicated to providing microloans to artisans and craftspeople who could not get funding from traditional banks. We funded a glassblower in Vermont. We saved a historic bookbindery in London. We helped a family of weavers in Peru expand their workshop. The logo was no longer a golden bull. It was a simple line drawing of an oak tree, sketched by my grandmother in her diary. My phone rang. I saw the area code. It was from the city. I let it go to voicemail. I knew who it was, or at least, I knew who it represented. My parents were living in a reality that must have felt like a hallucination to them. After the foreclosure, they had bounced between cheap motels until the money ran out completely. Now they lived in a basement apartment in Queens. It had one window that looked out onto a brick wall. I did not visit them, but I kept tabs on them. I needed to know they were alive, if only to satisfy the last shred of filial duty in my heart. My father, Richard Sterling, the man who had once commanded boardrooms and terrified junior executives, was now working the night shift as a security guard at a storage facility. He wore a uniform that was 2 sizes too big for him. He spent his nights sitting on a plastic chair, guarding other people's junk, the very thing he had mocked me for doing. The irony was so precise it felt scripted. My mother, Elena, had found work as a member of the cleaning staff at a corporate gym. The woman who had once refused to touch a door handle without a sanitizer wipe was now scrubbing shower stalls and collecting used towels from people she would have once considered her inferiors. Every month, a letter would arrive at the Foundation's P.O. box. The handwriting on the envelope was always my mother's. Though it had become shaky and jagged, I never opened them. I knew what they said. They would be a mix of guilt-tripping, accusations, and begging. "We are family. How can you sleep at night? We need $500 for rent." I did not throw them away. I filed them. And then, for every letter I received, I wrote a check for $5,000 to the City Harvest Food Bank in their names. I made sure the donation receipt was sent to their basement apartment. It was my way of telling them that I was helping the hungry, just not the greedy. I was not cruel. I was just done. I had finally learned the difference between holding a grudge and holding a boundary. Kara. A voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see Julian standing in the doorway. Julian was the architect I had hired to stabilize the foundation of the museum. He was 40, with rough hands, sawdust in his hair, and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He didn't know who the Sterlings were. He didn't read the gossip columns. When we first met, he had looked at the rotting beams of the hollow and said, This wood has a story. Let's help it speak. I fell in love with him in that exact moment. Ready to go? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. The light is perfect right now. I stood up and grabbed my coat. Ready. We walked out to his truck, a battered old pickup that smelled of cedar and coffee. He didn't treat me like an heiress. He treated me like a partner. We spent our weekends hunting for salvageable materials at demolition sites or hiking through the valley. Do you want to drive? He asked, tossing me the keys. Always, I said. We drove through the winding country roads, the autumn leaves creating a tunnel of gold and crimson around us. I felt a sense of peace so profound it almost frightened me. For 30 years, my life had been defined by what I lacked. I lacked money. I lacked approval. I lacked love. Now, I was overflowing. We stopped at the small cemetery on the edge of town. It was an old place, quiet and forgotten by most, which was exactly why Grandma Beatrice had chosen it. She didn't want the ostentatious family crypt in the city. She wanted to be under the trees. I walked to her headstone. It was simple granite, unpolished and rough-hewn. Beatrice Sterling. She saw the value in everything. Julian stood back by the truck, giving me privacy. He understood that this was a conversation between two women who had survived the same war. I knelt in the grass. I reached into my bag and pulled out the book. It was the diary, the war diary of my grandfather that I had presented to her at that disastrous birthday party. The book my father had tossed aside as trash. I had finished the restoration. The leather was supple and rich, conditioned with oils I had mixed myself. The gold tooling on the spine caught the sunlight. The pages, once brittle and mildewed, were now clean and crisp, ready to last another 100 years. "Hi, Grandma," I whispered. I placed the book on the stone. I fixed it. I said, "It took me a year. I had to reconstruct the binding from scratch, but it is whole again." A breeze rustled the dry leaves around me. It sounded like a sigh of contentment. "I wanted to tell you that you were right," I continued, tracing the letters of her name. "You were right about everything. The money. It didn't fix them. It destroyed them because they were already broken. But it didn't break me." I looked back at Julian, who was leaning against the truck, looking up at the sky. I found someone who looks at the core. Grandma. Just like you said, I felt a tightness in my throat. But it wasn't sorrow. It was gratitude. "Thank you," I whispered, "not for the millions, but for the lesson. Thank you for teaching me that I could survive on $1 if I had to, but that I deserved the world." I stood up. I left the diary there. It belonged to her. I had already arranged for the cemetery keeper to place it in the small weatherproof box attached to the stone. A library for the dead, a story for anyone who stopped to read it. I walked back to the truck. Julian opened the door for me. "You okay?" he asked, studying my face. "I am perfect," I said. We got in, and I started the engine. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and bruised orange. "Where to?" Julian asked. "West," I said. "Just drive west until we run out of road." I pulled out onto the highway. The road stretched out before us, endless and open. I checked the rearview mirror one last time. The cemetery was gone. The town was fading. The memory of the cold, dark house where I had been a servant was dissolving into the distance. I was Kara Windermere. I was a restorationist. I was a philanthropist. I was a woman who had been given a rusty key and used it to unlock her own life. I pressed my foot down on the gas pedal. The truck surged forward, eating up the miles. I rolled down the window and let the wind whip through my hair. It felt like freedom. It felt like victory. And as the sun finally slipped behind the mountains, leaving us in the twilight, I smiled. The story of the Sterlings was over. My story was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it reminded you that your worth is never defined by a bank account or the opinions of those who cannot see your true value. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet countryside, or somewhere in between? Please drop a comment below and share your location and your thoughts on Kara's journey. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please consider subscribing to the channel Family Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to show your support, and if you really want to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it, please press the hype button. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, remember to stand tall and never let anyone treat you like a bad investment. You are the treasure.